If someone were to ask me about the most thrilling and mind-blowing thing I've ever witnessed, I wouldn't go on about waterfalls or other overhyped tourist spots. No, the most unforgettable thing I've ever seen happened in the dead of night, in complete silence, when a prosthetic leg came flying out of a third-floor window and landed in a taxi waiting outside the building. Too bad I missed the whole thing. The car was already pulling away when I got to the window. Otherwise, it would have been something truly unforgettable. Now you're probably thinking, who on earth is tossing their wife's prosthetic leg out of the window like that? Well, let me tell you the story. For years, my wife and I watched as a seemingly perfect family slowly fell apart. About 5 years ago, a young couple moved into our building. They took over a one-room apartment that had previously belonged to the woman's grandmother, who had been safely placed in a nursing home. In the beginning, they were the picture of love, all hugs and kisses. Basically, they couldn't keep their hands off each other. But, as is usually the case, the honeymoon did not last long. She owned a flower shop, and I worked in a factory. One day, an accident at my job changed everything. I won't go into the terrible details, but as a result, I had to amputate my leg right up to the hip. Their problems really started during his rehabilitation. It didn't take long to realize that she was too independent, maybe even too much. After the operation, she rarely visited me in the hospital, always claiming that she was too busy at the flower shop, although her staff seemed to be doing a great job without her. They bought in some fancy high-tech prosthesis. I'm not sure what it's called, but I know for sure that it was supposed to help me walk again. I had to learn how to use it, but my wife didn't seem to really want to help. I was trying to walk alone in the park near our house. Friends all understood that something was wrong with this couple. Of course, they didn't tell me what they saw while I was in the hospital, that she spent most of the nights here with a so-called supplier, or whoever she thought he was. She received him in her apartment, and for obvious reasons, I seemed more focused on the prosthesis than on my wife's affairs. But then the truth came out. One day I decided to take a closer look at what was going on in her flower shop. And it didn't take him long to realize that the store had a perfectly made bed, and everything a man might need, not just for flowers. This led to a massive dispute, and that's how I learned the whole story. You know, when the windows are wide open, you can hear everything from a mile away. And let me tell you, the neighbors have heard all the juicy details of our drama. They found out how young his wife was and how quickly her life went downhill. At first it wasn't even clear why. After all, her husband was still alive and wasn't such a burden. But then came the sequel, and it was something else. The poor guy was basically aired out for the whole street to hear. His wife claimed that she could no longer bear to look at his stump, that she wasn't attracted to him anymore. She needed an outlet, she said. After all, she was young, and apparently she wanted sex. But he couldn't give that to her anymore. Not because he didn't want to, but because, in her eyes, anything involving his prosthetic leg wasn't real intimacy. Things escalated. After she called him a stump and one-legged a couple of times, they had some kind of argument, followed by the sound of quick footsteps racing down the hall. Moments later, his wife came storming out of the door, phone in hand, dialing a taxi. The taxi arrived quite quickly. But in those few minutes, the neighbors heard something that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. She practically teased the whole yard, proudly bragging about her new boyfriend, who, unsurprisingly, turned out to be the very supplier she spent the nights with. When I started threatening to kill them both, she looked him straight in the eye and calmly said something like, "Don't forget whose money bought this prosthesis. I'll take it from you, and then what will you run after it on?" That's when everything fell into place. My wife managed to slip into a taxi and drive away, but she did not have time to notice how the chaos began. If she had arrived a little earlier, I'm sure he would have taken out his displeasure on her Lexus parked at the entrance. After that, I fell into a deep depression. Everyone watched as the process of their divorce unfolded right in front of our eyes, as if in slow motion, and poor Lucas just absorbed it all. But recently I plucked up the courage and tried to talk to women again. I even met a girl who I started a warm and strong relationship with. So, why am I telling you all this? Well, the final didn't take long to arrive, and when it did, we couldn't believe our eyes. It was like something straight out of a movie. I'm not one to take pleasure in other people's misfortunes, but when I saw her, my ex, who is now in a wheelchair after an accident, shopping at the same store, we couldn't help but feel irony. It's like they say, youth comes and goes. And now, I wonder, how's intimacy treating her now? Of course, that's a rhetorical question, but one thing's for sure, there's a higher power watching over us.